October is soon over, and so we're almost at the end of Ravenloft month. Before the month is up, however, I thought it would only be right to talk about at least one adventure you can run as an introduction to Ravenloft, and how you could go about adapting that adventure into 5th edition. The adventure I chose is Howls of the Night, which I would say is inspired by tales of the Grim, Moorhounds, or the Hound of Baskerville. The main reasons why I chose this adventure is that it offers a good introduction to some of the fundamental elements of Ravenloft, horror, curses, and potentially tough choices. It also has a pretty nice blend of investigation and combat, which I think would work well with 5th edition. It is also set in Mordant, which is one of the more iconic realms of Ravenloft that work well as a starting point for a campaign, but is perhaps not as well known as Barovia, despite being the second domain ever created for the setting. It is also a bit of a shorter adventure. I think it could be run in an evening or two, so it could be run as a one-shot, take a bit of a break from your normal games, or as a way to try on the Ravenloft setting without committing to something too massive. And I also see potential for adapting it both for low and mid levels, depending on your preferences. So let me start by describing the adventure. Roughly 100 years before the players arrive at the scene, two rival families, the Campbells and the Westcotts, were about to set apart their differences and unite through the marriage of Burton Westcott and Anne Campbell. Anne did not wish to marry, however, and something went terribly wrong. The exact details can vary, but in each variation of the story, the following is true. While staying at Westcott Manor before the wedding, Anne killed Burton's brother and fled into the moors surrounding the estate. Burton sent his hounds after his fiancée and chased her into the bog. Anne ran into quicksand along with the hounds and drowned, but not before pronouncing a curse upon the Westcott family. The adventure actually presents 4 different alternate histories of how that night went down. Each one is slightly different, and depending on which one you choose, it changes who is the villain of a tale. Burton could have been evil, or Anne could have been, or they could both be evil. Or, my personal favorite, the whole thing is based in tragedy and misunderstanding, and the curse itself has grown to become the villain, taking on a life of its own. Regardless, it's up to you as a DM to choose which series of events are true. The players will arrive into the story as they approach the town of Mordenshire. Taking up lodgings at one of the local taverns, they will hear the tale of a cursed moor and the terrible hounds that plague them, and be offered a reward to hunt down the hounds. The next morning, the group will awake to find that the hounds have murdered a local shepherd, and be drafted into a hunt for the beasts. Traveling with a large group of locals, the player characters will eventually become disoriented in the mists, cut off from the rest of the search party, and will find themselves being hunted by the boghounds. Relief comes when the party encounters the gardener of Westcott Manor, who will offer to guide them to relative safety of the manor, where they can rest up and learn more about the curse that has befallen this land. Burton Westcott, who is being kept alive by the curse, will try to sway them to help him break the terrible spell, and will send them into the moors once more to hunt for Anne. After suffering through several dangers in the wilds, the group will eventually encounter Anne herself and find that one way to break the curse would be to bring Burton and Anne together once more in the moors. After a climactic final encounter, the curse will hopefully be broken, and the group can continue on to new adventures, perhaps somewhat richer for their troubles. For the most part, the adventure requires very little adjustment to be run with 5th edition rules. Just insert the occasional skill check as needed. But there are a few points where a little bit of work needs to be done. First, you should decide if you're running this for a low-level party or a mid-level one. I think I could run this adventure with level 1 characters, and if I would do so, I imagine they might be level 2 or 3 after it's over. The main thing to take into account when it comes to a level is the nature of the boghounds and the moorhound. If your characters are low-leveled, then use the stats for mastiffs for the boghounds, with the added weakness that they are slain by sunlight. For the moorhound, you can use the stats for a deaf dog, removing its 2-headed trait, or, even more appropriately, you can use the stats for a shadow mastiff from Volos. The original moorhound was immune to non-magical weapon damage. This might be a bit too much for a low-level 5th edition party, but if you're using a deaf dog, consider making it resistant to physical damage. Of course, in either case, you should keep the original creature's immortality. The moorhound should not be able to be destroyed permanently unless it's exposed to sunlight or through any other means described in the adventure. For slightly higher level party, you can keep the boghounds as mastiffs and simply add more of them, or you can use shadowhounds from Volos for the stats for them. For the moorhound, I suggest using the Yefhound from Volos. It is rather fitting in its abilities. When it comes to the main NPCs of the adventure, Anne and Burton, I suggest using a Spectre as a base for Anne, and the stats of a Noble for Burton if you're running it for a lower level group. Change them to a Ghost and a Knight, or Veteran, if you're running the adventure for a mid-level group. For the initial part of the adventure, there is very little you need to change. Keep in mind at all times that the adventure expects you to adjust the numbers of monsters as needed. This can be especially true when running the adventure for a low-level party. Just because the adventure says there are 10 Bughounds, doesn't mean there has to be. For Quicksand, replace the spell save with a dexterity saving throw, and the swimming proficiency with a athletic checks, and look up the 5th edition rules for drowning. The manor requires very little adjustment as well. Use commoner stats for all the servants except the butler. Use the stats for a thug at lower levels, or for the stats for a veteran for a mid-level party. The different combat encounters toward the later half of the adventure are also pretty straightforward for the most part. Use zombies, poison snakes, and boars as they appear in the monster manual. You can use fatigue levels to show the boar's tiredness. Consider giving them 3 levels of fatigue if you think your party will have a hard time with them. Otherwise, just 1 is enough. The only creature that might be a bit difficult is the baby shambling mound. For a mid-level group, you can just use a standard shambling mound. But if you're running this as a low-level adventure, that could mean the end of your party. I suggest trying to reduce its damage and health by a significant amount, and to remove all of its resistances. Perhaps give it somewhere around 40 or so HP, and by the very least reduce all of its damages down by 1 die. You may even consider changing its damage dice to d4s. Even then, it could be a dangerous opponent for your party to take on. Of course, you could always keep the mound the way it is in the manual, and simply hope your players realize they should run from it, since it cannot leave its clearing. The prequel to Curse of Strahd, Howls, presented a similar situation. I know that my players at the time did not realize the danger and decided to try to stay and fight the shambler they encountered, despite being level 2. Speaking of Curse of Strahd, you could run Howls of the Night as an alternate opening to Curse of Strahd. If you do, consider adding a milestone when the group takes their long rest after arriving at Westcott Manor, letting them reach level 2, and then add another milestone after they've completed the adventure. Even if you're not planning to run Curse of Strahd, those could be good places for milestones, if you're using those rules for leveling. If you don't have your own copy of Howls of the Night, you can pick it up as a PDF from a DM's Guild. I'll add a link below. I find it to be a rather enjoyable adventure and a quick, good introduction to Ravenloft, and you should have all the information you need to run it now in the 5th edition. Or you could always give it a go with the original 2nd edition rules. If you're looking for general advice on how to run Ravenloft in 5th edition, one of my first videos was on the subject. The sound and video quality is a bit low, but hopefully you will find the information useful. I'll post a link in the video description so you can check it out. Well, that was all for this time. I hope you enjoyed my video, and if you did, why not leave a like? If you want to support my channel, then please share this video on social media or with friends. It really helps out a lot. You can also follow me on Tumblr or Twitter, or check out my DM's Guild product page. Links to all of that in the description below. Until next time, Dungeon Delvers.